Hello and welcome to Why Button, the podcast that asks why we care about video games. I'm your host, Kyle Starr. On this show, I interview creators, enthusiasts, journalists, and media personalities about their origins with video games, what keeps them so interested in the medium, and what excites them about the future. On this episode, I'm joined by Pixar Creative Director Tasha Sounart. Today, Tasha oversees creative direction and integration of Pixar properties within Disney parks, which is one of the coolest jobs I've ever heard of. But her journey into this role is no less amazing. She joined the studio as an animator on their second feature film, A Bug's Life, and continued to animate on following films Toy Story 2, Monsters, Inc., Finding Nemo, and Cars. Then she pivoted her career into games, leaving Pixar for Double Fine Productions as the lead animator on Brutal Legend, which is one of my favorite Double Fine games. She went on to lead the development of Costume Quest, which is a very cool story you'll hear more about in great detail on this episode. Then after a few smaller projects at Double Fine, Tasha returned to Pixar for a bit more stability and work-life balance. Fast forward to today, where she now works directly with Disney Imagineers on attractions and experiences. This episode will probably feel a little more career-focused than other episodes, but that's just because I couldn't help myself from digging into her awesome career journey. That said, video games are core to Tasha. She was one of the most unabashed gamers I've had on the show, as illustrated by her affection for meaty RPGs and MMOs. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Tasha, thank you for joining me on Why Button. The real purpose of this show, or the impetus for it, was I'm a person who I do play video games. I enjoy video games, and I have since I was a little kid, since my earliest memories. But as I've gotten older, I realized I've become more, I think, immersed in the media around games, the just observing the industry and how games are impacting different parts of life and society, and less about the playing. When I play, I still enjoy my time, but I find myself very quickly going into a state of feeling guilt maybe by playing, or just I'm not getting as much out of it as I did when I was younger, but I'm still very, very fascinated and interested in the medium in general. And that's pretty much where I spend all my time. And, leisure time is, reading news articles or websites about video games, listening to video game podcasts, creating a video game podcast, just all kinds of conversations around it is where I feel is most interesting. And so I decided to put this together to talk to people about why they also might have a care for video games. And that could be observing the medium and being part of the medium, or playing as well. And I just find the whole thing fascinating. And that's really it. There's not really a core to this. But as we converse with people and as I chat with people, we end up coming upon some really interesting ideas or thinking around how the medium is impactful and has shaped us and maybe society at large. So that's sort of where we are. But I just want to say thank you for agreeing to do this and chatting with me. So hello, Tasha.
Yeah. Hello. No problem.
Good. For starters, your pedigree, I think, is something that I find very astounding. So you started as an animator at Pixar, which in and of itself is extremely cool. At one point in your career, you transitioned to video games and working at Double Fine, and then you moved back to Pixar in a different capacity. So there's going to be an element, we can chat about your career, but I think there's probably some, we'll weave video games into there. I imagine that's a big part of it, obviously working at Double Fine, but probably through Pixar and your upbringing. So I guess I just want to start with, what are you currently working on at Pixar? Like, what are you doing at Pixar? And maybe we can work our way backward from there.
Yeah. I am a creative director in our theme parks group. So our theme parks group is really small. It's only, 6 or 8 people now. We've gotten smaller since COVID, unfortunately. There was a really rough time when the parks were closed. And so we weren't getting as many projects. And so unfortunately, they let some people go from our team. Anyway, on to better news. The parks are open now. And really, ever since Iger came back, they've really been, greenlighting a lot of new projects. And so that's really good for us. In the theme parks group, we work on anything that's with the Pixar characters in the Disney parks, and that's worldwide. So really, it's a lot of different things. It could be character costumes, shows, attractions, parades, festivals. There's Pixar Fest going on right now at Disneyland that we helped out on. Projection shows we work on for like the castle and things like that. Some merchandise like novelties and things like that, food items. So it's really a wide variety of things, and that's what's really fun about it and keeps things interesting.
Yeah. And now this is not your, as I mentioned before, this is not your first stint at Pixar. You started your career there and then kind of boomerang back into it. When you started at Pixar, you started during their infancy, really. It was their, as far as I'm aware, you started on A Bug's Life, right? That was their second film. And that's
Yes.
your origin story with Pixar. That's wild. What was that like? Like, what was working at Pixar in those days like, to your recollection at least?
Well, it was actually really similar to college. A lot of people there were right out of college, and a lot of people went to Cal Arts. So it was almost like a continuation of Cal Arts because the animation department was all in one big space, and it was only about 30 animators at the time. Now there's over 100 animators. The company was about 200 people, and now it's over 1,000. And so I would say it was more close knit and younger. There weren't a lot of people who had kids, most people right out of college. So it really had kind of this scrappy startup feel. And not a lot of people even knew what Pixar was at the time. I mean, Toy Story had come out and that was it, but people didn't know the name. If I said I work at Pixar, they didn't know what that was.
Crazy.
Yeah. So it was a lot different. And my first assignment on Bugs Life was animating blades of grass.
The most exciting part of animating, I'm sure.
So that the technical people, the sim people, could get an example to work from when they were doing the sim for like the clovers and the grass swaying in the breeze.
Yeah.
But then I got to animate characters. I got to animate like Flick and Dot a lot. And it was such a small group that I really felt like I had an immediate, I was immediately able to animate like main characters, even though I was right out of college. So it was a really good opportunity that I feel very lucky that I got in at the time that I did.
Indeed. Real kind of inside baseball question. Do you like animating when you are animating? And I know that's not what you do now, but when you were, did you like animating the characters more than, say, Blades of Grass? I'm ready for a surprise answer here, but I can't imagine it is. I imagine animating characters is probably more exciting.
Yeah, it is. I would say my specialty is cute.
Okay.
Cute things. And also, I like doing facial animation. Like, so a close up of a character is more interesting to me than like a far kind of an action shot. That's not really, I like animating like the emotional moments, but I do still animate sometimes. Like, sometimes if we just have something quick, like a quick little, like I animated a little bit of a commercial last year for a resorts commercial that we had to do a Lightning McQueen shot for. And it was, I think, only 2 seconds long. So I was like, okay, I can do it. It's just when it comes to a larger project, then it's too hard for me to juggle all of my day-to-day tasks with also animating, which you really, to animate, you need a good chunk of time to just sit and concentrate on that because it's such a slow process.
Sure. I've been reflecting on time a lot lately. This is a bit of a tangent, but the hobbies that I used to enjoy and be into, writing being one of them, where I would need like blocks of about 4 hours to actually write a piece, to sit down, write it, sit back, edit it, think through it. I just don't have that. So finding like things I can do in 30 minutes, which again, animating is not one of them. That's
right.
Can be very challenging. And to the point of animation, you're actually the second animator I've had on the show. I've had Lana Bashinsky from Riot Games on as well. And we've talked a bit about animating. And I asked these dumb questions like, would you rather, animate a blade of grass versus a character's facial expressions? Because I just don't know enough about the medium. And sometimes I'm surprised by the things that I enjoy. Sometimes it is what looks like a mundane thing is actually more fun and interesting. So that's why I ask. But.
Well, I think, different animators have different preferences and different strengths. Sure. So there are people who would love to animate the action sequence or love to animate something very physical, whereas I'm more, I would say, emotional, or I like to make things look appealing. So like on Finding Nemo, I animated Nemo's friends a lot. And on Monsters, I animated Boo a lot. So sometimes they would give me the shots with the cute characters because they knew that I liked to do that and I was good at it. So it is something now when in my current job in theme parks, I enjoy doing. It's not always animation. A lot of times, in fact, usually it's drawovers. I will give notes on a character or a animated sequence and draw over it and give notes. But it is something that sometimes it is really awesome when I get to still put my own spin on it. Like for the cruise ships, I designed some bath toy versions of Toy Story characters that went in like the kids water play area. So they're all chunkified and cute. But that was really fun to work on because it was like I still got to put in some of my own artistic eye, I guess you would say. So you're not just replicating what the movie looks like, but you're transforming the characters into different styles. And so that's a lot of fun.
Sure. And I guess help me understand what your day-to-day as a creative director would be. I mean, compared to animating and actually being hands-on, like there's part of me that's like creative director. You're just sitting in a chair saying, bring me your presentations and I will judge them. And, the ones I like, we can keep, and the ones we don't, go back and figure out something else.
It kind of is like that.
Okay.
It kind of is. People don't always listen to me, but so I guess we're sort of like in the games industry, it would be like a publisher where you are assessing in a more broad kind of view a project. So Disney Imagineering will come to us with an idea, hopefully at the very beginning, so we can give input. Like, hey, we want to, let's say, okay, so one of the things I worked on was Lightning McQueen's Racing Academy. So it's like, okay, we want to do a stage show with the Cars characters. So they will bring to us this problem that they want to solve. And then we will we'll help brainstorm about, well, how do we do a stage show with cars and have them, they need to be able to drive around. There's not enough room on a stage to drive around. Okay, is it going to be, what kind of media are we going to use? Is it going to be media? Is it going to be animatronics? Is it going to be, a mix? And so we will brainstorm on that and work with them on the script. And then a lot of times we will do the animation, so I will direct the animation. So on Lightning McQueen's Racing Academy, that was interesting because we had a team of animators who did a lot of all of the animatronic animation for Lightning McQueen. It was like 9 minutes of animatronic animation, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is. It is a lot.
Sure.
I'm kind of skipping around a little bit, but basically my job is on all phases of the project to give input and make sure that the characters are film accurate, appealing, funny, they don't do anything weird.
Right.
And make sure that the whole project all comes together in, one cohesive vision.
Sure.
And there will also be a creative director on the Disney side, on Imagineering. So we work a lot in tandem with that team to get everything built and incorporated correctly. So like on Lightning McQueen's Racing Academy, we actually built the set in VR because there's media behind the animatronic figure. So we wanted the eye lines to match up between the media and Lightning, and him to see if you sat in different seats of the audience, if you can still see his eyes or how far he needs to turn towards this side of the stage or towards this side. So you could sit in different seats of the audience and watch the show in the VR environment. And so that was really handy too, because the actual theater is in Florida. So I did go out there a few times, but when we're all the way in California, it was really good to have it in VR so that we could test things out.
That's an awesome use of technology. Just, practical use of doing that, right? Where I'm putting myself back in the days of, let's say Disneyland's created, and I'm actually reading a book on Imagineering right now, but at Disneyland's created and we're doing, say we build a show or something, you would have to run that show multiple times with people in multiple seats to say like, okay, I saw this, I didn't see this, blah, 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 blah. Like it's just insanely exhaustive and resource intensive and exhaustive. Like, so it's very cool that you're leveraging that technology and actually like playing with the cameras in a 3D space to understand like what you see and what you don't. I guess there's probably a parallel to that in video games as well. When you're playing with a different, with a 3D environment, if you're working on a 3D game and you see, can you see a character from a certain angle? What are you seeing from a certain angle? How do you have to build the model? How do you have to, shape the environment so that a player is not, seeing the cracks or seeing through, clipping through certain things or seeing areas they probably shouldn't be seeing. It's just interesting how that's kind of like moved its way into the practical world or working with practical animation or effects or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot of overlap of playtesting in games and building your white box model, and then what we do in theme parks. We're basically playtesting the theme park attraction. You could test out like, oh, if you have a ride vehicle that can actually turn, then that's like your camera, because you're like, okay, let's turn it this way. You can experiment with different speeds. You can, one of the things is that we like to test out is how the different forms of media, a physical object plus a screen, might incorporate together. How's that going to work? And the scales of things, how big or small can you make something? Because a lot of times you're cheating, you're cheating the spaces a lot, like you would do in a video game.
Right.
But if it's physical, you don't have as much wiggle room, I guess. And in a physical space, it's like, oh, we only have this much of a building. So how can we make the set still feel large? So let's try doing some cheating the forced perspective of the buildings or things like that. We put a media behind it of like more cityscapes, so then the city feels larger. Anyway, I think there is a lot of overlap of testing and so much, like, I am really excited about the use of VR in that aspect. I don't play games in VR.
Sure.
I don't like being so I guess cut off from everything.
So you use it more as a tool. To you, it's a tool.
Yeah.
It's less of an experience and more something you can leverage.
Right. Yes.
Got it. Yeah. And I flashed to when you mentioned like in cheating things, and we should get into game development as well, because I know we sort of jumped over that part of your career, and I'm really curious about it.
Yeah, I guess that's what this podcast is about.
No, it is. I think, and this happens a lot with the episodes on the show, where I do a lot of like, there's a large chunk of it that's about like the person, the career, what you're doing. This is all sort of set up, and I'm finding little clues in here. But when you mentioned cheating in games, and yes, technically you have, I mean, depending on the hardware you're working with, right? You have a limit or a limitless, amount of space you can be working in 3D space or whatever, especially with today's hardware. Like you can, a draw distance could be forever almost at this point. But even in 2D spaces, I'm thinking about like maybe a game like, I don't know if this is true or not, I haven't played it in a long time, but like Mega Man X, where it's an SNES game, but they are working with parallax to kind of show that, I guess, sort of cheat that there's more to this world. It's deep. It looks deeper than it actually is, but it's just all 2D, right? And those tricks have been applicable to animation forever, right? To make something seem much larger than it is. All that said, you went from Pixar originally, working on all these notable films, which is awesome, but then you made this pivot and started working at Double Fine. I think there's a thread there, obviously, from what you said about working as a creative director and harnessing a vision and looking at a vision and working in these different spaces with different tools and making parallels back to video games with like whiteboxing and, acting as a publisher and all of that. But you don't get I don't think you get that experience just working at Pixar. You get that mainly from, or a lot of that experience, I think, from working at Double Fine. So what was that transition like when you went from Pixar into Double Fine?
So at Double Fine, I was a directing animator on Brutal Legend.
I love that game.
And after Brutal Legend, I directed my own game called Costume Quest, so that I was the project lead on that.
I started playing it last night, by the way.
Yeah, I need to finally play that with my son this year, I think.
It's so cool. Like, I'm sorry, I'll pause there and talk about Costume Quest really quick, as I'm only in like the first level, but just the atmosphere of it, I think, is so neat. It's this hocus pocus / like ET Halloween party thing, but then it's got a little bit of that charm of like Nightmare Before Christmas, or even like Kingdom Hearts. It has a little bit of that vibe to it, kind of pulling in some of that Disney feel, I think. But yeah, it's a really cool, charming game. It definitely has the Double Fine charm. It is really, really cool and quaint, and I'm really appreciating the vibe, at least in level 1 or the first area that I'm in. It's the Halloween town. Very cool game.
Yeah, I mean, there's things I would have liked to have done with it, made it bigger. I would have liked to have co-op play, and would have been nice to have voice acting. But, we made the game in 9 months with a very small team and a very small budget. And that was, I'm proud of what we were able to do in that time. So that was kind of what I was going for, is an atmosphere feeling. So thank you.
Yeah, that's actually one question I have about the game specifically, is I noticed right away that there's no, at least for right now, there's no voiceover, there's no voice acting. But you said you came from Brutal Legend, which was heavily voice acted.
Yes.
A lot of cameos and things. You've got Lemmy and a bunch of other, I'm sure, cameos that have popped into that game. And it's like flipping from one to the other. You can see, I don't know if you can see the budget. I just sort of looked at it as like an artistic choice. But as you're talking about it, you can see that there are little maybe cuts or workarounds that you guys did to make that a much smaller, experience.
Well, I was really influenced by the like Charlie Brown holiday specials.
Oh my God, that's perfect. You nailed it.
That's always what I envisioned the voices would be, like real kids voices, not sound like child actors, but have that authenticity.
Yeah.
That's always what I imagined. So if we had, unlimited budget, that's what I would have done, but we couldn't. So
But
unfortunately.
at least the attitude of the kids at least comes through. It's very parallel. The way they talk, the way that they're written, comes through
Right.
very
Yeah.
Charlie Brown. So yeah, that's great. Cool. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt with my costume quest.
No, that's okay. Yeah. So, the story of why I left Pixar is partially because of my love for video games. It's because ever since I was a kid, I was a huge gamer, loved gaming ever since like the Atari 2600. So I never had the chance to work on one. And so I was always kind of curious, and I would always be reading the gaming websites. Like while I was at work, if I had a break, I would look at the gaming websites. So I was always in touch with that world. And through some mutual friends, I had met Tim Schafer, and he gave me a little tour of the studio. And I just loved the type of games that they worked on. Like you said, charming, funny. They have a big emphasis on art, like a cool art style. And a lot of game companies, especially at the time, I feel like now there's a little bit more variety of games out there, like with all the indie games and things, but a lot more variety of art styles. But it felt like a lot of games were just trying to be very realistic and kind of gritty. I was like, I don't want to work on that. That's not my thing. But at the same time, they were working on Brutal Legend, or it was in pre-production on Brutal Legend, and it seemed very different from what I was doing at Pixar and exciting. At Pixar, after working on a lot of feature films, I don't know, I just felt like I was kind of in a rut and wasn't really learning too much anymore, and felt like I just needed some kind of a shock to the system to get myself reinvigorated. And so that was why I left. And then also, it's a much smaller company, so you get an opportunity to learn a lot of things that you didn't get to do at Pixar. At Pixar, I was just doing animation. At Double Fine, I learned modeling, rigging. We were doing our own camera work, which you don't do at Pixar as an animator. So, and also just that extra step of incorporating your animation into the gameplay, which you don't do at a film studio. So there's a lot of things that I learned there that it just made me really, reinvigorated. So that was a lot of fun. And we were also just such a close knit team, and it was probably 50 people at the whole studio. So I made a lot of really good friends there. It was a really fun time.
Yeah. Yeah. With Costume Quest, like, I mean, you sort of described it right there. You are hands-on with it, but you're also, correct me if I'm wrong, you're directing this game. Was it your idea, and it all comes to fruition? Yes, we want to get behind that game. If I was reading up a bit about it, did it come through Amnesia Fortnite, like the idea of it? And
yes.
For those listening, Amnesia Fortnite is sort of this, I guess for lack of a better term, call it an internal game jam, right? You guys take a break from the project you're working on, you focus on something, you mix up a bunch of people and teams and see what can come out over the course of 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then
we just made a small prototype. It was basically one street in that neighborhood that had one character, I think maybe 2 or 3 costumes you could find, and you could trick or treat at like 3 houses or something. Very simple prototype that just showed you what the core gameplay loop was. And so when Brutal Legend 2 got canceled, Tim was shopping. We had like maybe 3 or 4 ideas that came out of that Amnesia Fortnite, and he was shopping those around to different publishers. And so THQ, I don't know if they're still around anymore.
I think there was a big...
Yeah, THQ was the one that picked up Costume Quest. And so thankfully, they really were pretty hands-off creatively.
Yeah.
They didn't have a lot of creative notes and kind of just let us do our own thing. But the big thing was just the time and the budget was really short and stressful. And that was actually one of the reasons I ended up going back to Pixar. I'm not meaning to jump ahead, but it was kind of a stressful time, but also exciting at the same time. But the idea for Costume Quest was an idea that I had since I was a little kid. I actually remember drawing these little pixel characters when I was a kid, trick-or-treating. And I always loved Halloween as a kid, but not the scary part of Halloween.
Sure, right.
The candy, the costumes, like pretending to be someone else for a day, the mood of it. So that's what I wanted to capture in the game, but also just that it's a really fun, the idea of pretending to be someone they're not works really well as a gameplay element, and collecting costume pieces and collecting candy. Like
it seems like Yeah, as you play it, it's also obvious. Like everything's like, well, yeah, of course the currency is candy. Of course the costumes make the kids feel different and behave differently, and that makes for a great like turn-based RPG or whatever. And everything works very well. You're not, it doesn't, nothing feels very ham-fisted with like, oh, we're just going to kind of shove this mechanic in there because we need it for this type of game. It all just feels like, oh, well, that's what we that's what make believe is as a kid. It's all right in front of you, so it's very obvious, which makes it such a fun experience. I think maybe especially as an adult, right? Like you're reliving it, kind of.
Right, and it's an RPG just because I love RPGs, and that's the kind of game I would want to make. So
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it could have been a different type of game if I liked action games. It could have been an action game, but those are just my favorite kind of games. So and the other big inspiration I would say was Zelda and Earthbound, which is like two of my really favorite games. So those, and then the Charlie Brown holiday specials are probably like the most influential.
Mash them all together and you get Costume Quest. That's awesome.
And plus Halloween, and then
Yeah. What comes first? Are you more fascinated, as growing up, were you fascinated with video games first? Are you fascinated with animation first? Were you ever even fascinated with animation? Was animation a means to video games? I'm sort of like, I want to untangle that little knot. Like, how do we get from Tasha, the person who's drawing little pixel characters, to the animator, to then going, actually, I never had my shot in games. I want to try that.
Well, so I never was that into animation.
Okay.
I know it sounds really like, in fact, I'm not even that into movies. Like
every animator and film major right now is going like, I'm trying so hard.
I know I'm the odd duck at Pixar because I don't watch movies unless I have to for work, or if my husband turns on a movie or my son turns on a movie, then I watch it. But and sometimes I'm pleasantly surprised. I get sucked in, but I don't. For me, that's not what I seek out. I was always really into video games, and I was always really into comics. And so that's where I came to animation from. Originally, I thought I wanted to draw comics, like for my career. I knew I wanted to do something with art because I was just always drawing, and always drawing comics, like ever since I was a little kid. Making up characters and things, and always loved the Muppets. That's another the Muppets. In fact, my kid, so he's autistic, and even though he's 10 years old, he just got back into Sesame Street again, and he's been watching all these Sesame Street. I'm just like, it's still so funny.
Yeah,
Sesame Street
is good.
The aliens, oh my god, the aliens, I love that. Anyway, so I think it's almost like storytelling and world building is interesting to me. And I got into animation when my mom found like a summer school program for animation. It's called California State Summer School for the Arts. It's still around, CISA for short. When I was in high school, and they don't just do animation. They are a summer program for all different art disciplines. So music, dance, fine art. I think they have writing, filmmaking, all these different things, but they had animation. And so my mom was like, oh, this seems like something you might like. And so that was when I first did animation. I thought, oh, well, maybe this could be a career. And it was also around the time when Disney Animation was having their huge resurgence with The Lion King, with Little Mermaid,
Aladdin,
the 2D animation.
Yeah, yes. Beauty and the Beast, all this jazz.
And so, they're publishing an article in the LA Times about, oh, look how much money animators are making. And so my dad's like, oh, maybe you could get a job in the arts. And so from there, I went to Cal Arts for college. And so that was how I got into animation. And then Pixar was I had a portfolio review at school, and they offered me an internship at Pixar. And it was interesting. Like I said, nobody really knew what Pixar was at the time, but they knew it was computers. And a lot of people at that time didn't want to work on computers. They still wanted to do the 2D animation. Like I said, like Aladdin, Lion King, that was all my peers. They wanted to do that. And I, having grown up loving video games, I was like, computers, great. It's like combining two things that I like, art and computers. So sure, I'll give this a shot. And so at the internship at Pixar, that's where they taught us. We had a class of like maybe 10 people, and they taught us how to do computer animation, which now they don't have to teach people anymore because people can just buy the software at home.
Yeah. True.
But at the time, no one knew how to do it. Even our classes at Cal Arts, we didn't have a well, we did have a computer animation class, but it was Deluxe Paint on Amiga.
Far cry from you were using, I imagine, the Pixar machines, right? At Pixar, is that the case?
Yeah, the big Silicon Graphics.
Yeah.
Massive computers.
Not going to find that in the classroom, I guess.
Right. So, yeah, it was just, I feel like, people kind of ask like, oh, or, they say that you're so talented or you're so lucky. It's almost like a combination, I feel like, of talent, luck, taking opportunities, to get to where I am in my career. But I do feel very lucky at the time that I was getting into computer animation and I happened to enjoy it was the time when the Pixar was just coming up.
Yeah. So then what was it about? I mean, this merger of, yes, you've got this now art background, but you saw computers as the a piece of the video games, right? Video games being that merger of tech and art. Mm-hmm. When you going back to like playing video games and if animation was, I don't want to call it a mistake, but not necessarily the path you thought you were going to go down, it just ended up being the case. Like,
right.
You enjoyed video games, you immersed yourself in video games and comics, as you said, but what was your first memory of a game?
Well, my first memory of games is playing on the Atari, Asteroids, the old terrible Pac-Man on there, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Or going to, Chuck E. Cheese, playing the Star Wars game at Chuck E. Cheese. And so when I was at Cal Arts, that was when Super Nintendo that was the era of Super Nintendo. And I was playing tons of Super Nintendo in my free time, so it was either drawing at Cal Arts or playing Super Nintendo. But, the animation still on Super Nintendo was very rudimentary. At the time, I didn't even think of like animating or doing art for games as a career possibility. Like games were still so far behind like filmmaking and what Toy Story was and things like that I didn't even think of it as like a possibility. It wasn't on my radar. It wasn't on anyone's radar.
So while you liked games, you never really thought about it as a future, right? You just kind of looked at this as something, right, an entertainment medium that I'm just going to engage with, that I do engage with and enjoy. Right. Got it. What was it about games then, whether you're playing in Chuck E. Cheese or I guess fast forward, because there's quite a delta or a delta in the time between the Atari and the Super Nintendo. Was there there stuff in between? Were you playing on the NES and the Genesis and Game Boys and things like that? Or did you just didn't really have it around and you made the leap into the Super Nintendo?
No, I had a Nintendo. I never had any of the Sega systems. I was always a Nintendo girl.
Okay. Fighting words, but okay, fine.
No, I mean, I recognize I'm not one of the, competitive gamers, but I think one of the things is I always loved puzzles. I always loved brain teasers, and now I like crossword puzzles, jigsaw puzzles. I like having that kind of brain teasing aspect or figuring things out. I also like playing fantasy football, which I think kind of scratches that same itch of like, on my fantasy football team, I call them characters sometimes because to me, it's like playing an RPG where you're matching up your party members.
I'd never thought about fantasy football that way. It's funny you say that. There's another sports analogy I'd heard. Like, I've never thought of fantasy football about scratching that same itch, but I could definitely see it doing that, where a video game, yes, there's a lot of puzzly elements, depending on the game. There are puzzly elements, and I'm one who's drawn to more puzzle games and playing things like Animal Well right now, and played Chance of Sonar and a few others recently, mainly largely puzzle-focused games. And yes, fantasy football, it is like, how can I shuffle these quote-unquote characters around to have the best outcome, right, and beat these other people? Another sports analogy that I had never thought of was football or sports as a roguelike. This comes from a friend of the show, Brennan Bigley, on from Into the Aether. He was talking about how just the idea that football or any sport really, there's an end time to each of the players that's playing, and so you have to kind of mix up your team to the best of your ability over a course of time and players will start aging out, and you have to refresh your team. It's a very interesting video game way to look at a sport that I never had.
Yeah, and I think the games that I tend to like are RPGs, and I do like puzzle games. I think, my favorite game of all time is Tears of the Kingdom. It has an artistic aesthetic that I love that looks like the Ghibli movies.
Yeah.
I love that aesthetic. It's so it's just so appealing. Everything about it just works so well. The sound design, the aesthetic, plus it has that puzzle aspect. I get to feel clever if I do something.
Yeah.
And it feels like an epic story. You feel like your character's making progress. So the things I like about RPGs, you feel like you're starting at a weaker state, and when you end the game, you feel, oh, I'm so powerful, I'm amazing.
So it's scratching all these like lack of a better term, these sensory things for you. It's hitting you aesthetically, visually. It's scratching the puzzle part of your brain. The auditory experience as well. I agree. Tears of the Kingdom was one of my favorite experiences ever. I love Breath of the Wild. I thought it was revolutionary. It's amazing. How could this get any better? And for me, it did. I know that that's not true for everybody, but that game, and I think my last episode with Simon Parkin of The New Yorker, he mentioned that it's a game that doesn't waste your time. That was another big thing for me as a parent. And maybe we could chat about that too, is like, as a parent, I don't have a lot of time. And so when I play a game, I want to make sure that I feel like I'm getting something out of it, even if I'm only sitting down for 5 minutes to play this thing, right? Can jump in, get out.
I can definitely relate to that.
Really? Can you? Can you now?
Yeah. And actually, the game that I play the most of, always, at least since COVID hit, is Final Fantasy 14. And that is one of the things I love about it, is that it allows me to jump in and I can feel like I'm making progress on something, even if I only have like half an hour. Or, I can switch characters. I can play the same or different jobs on the same character, which I love. There's a lot of different sort of activities you can do in the same game. I could just do a little bit of crafting if I wanted to see some numbers go up. It's not so violent that I can't play it in front of my son, so that's good. I really don't play a lot of really violent games. I guess that's the other thing, is I feel like the games that I choose, I do really have a certain aesthetic that I like. I tend to like a little bit more stylized, less realistic games, and they have to be sort of cute.
I was going to say, it goes back to your cute comment about your animation style. Yeah.
Yeah, because I love RPGs, but then my husband was playing the latest like Baldur's Gate, and heard so many reviews about it, and it sounds like an amazing game, but to my eye, it doesn't look pleasing. And so I haven't been able to like pick it up, even though maybe I would love it. I don't know.
I've tried it. I can't. It's not a game for me. I could see a world where in high school I could have really gotten into this. I could have really sunk some time into it. But again, there's no way I can get into that game if I only have 10 minutes, 20 minutes here and there. It's just not going to happen.
Oh, that's the other thing I was going to talk about with Final Fantasy that I love, is that a lot of times you can just play it solo. And that I love that they added the ability to go into a dungeon with NPC characters, instead of having to wait in the queue for
a party or whatever it is.
Because sometimes I'm just waiting and I'm like, oh, this is taking too long. And then I'll just go in with the NPCs. So that's nice that a lot of it you can play solo. I mean, I don't get into like the hardcore raiding just because, I just don't have the time to dedicate to that. But I play it as a casual.
Yeah. To the point of time and kids, what is your current relationship with games? So, I mean, yes, if you're playing Final Fantasy, 14 or whatever it happens to be, like, are you playing games regularly? Is it a daily thing? Is it a nightly thing for you? Is it an hour a week? Like, and you've kind of mentioned what style and types of games that you like playing, but what does that relationship look like now versus what it used to, maybe in the height of your game time? And maybe that's changed throughout the periods of your life.
Yeah, I mean, so I used to also play Final Fantasy 11 and World of Warcraft before I had a kid. And the difference is I used to do that in-game stuff. I used to be a lot more participating in like the guild. I used to be like a guild officer and participate in a lot more of the raids and things like that. But I feel like that is like, it's too structured. It almost feels like it would be a job. Like anyway.
Well, no, but I mean, for that, is there a social element of it that you were enjoying, that you're getting out of it? Because I'm not an MMO player. I tried my hand at World of Warcraft for, maybe a total of 20 hours in college, and it just never clicked for me. I like solo play. I like couch co-op, or like if we're playing a fighting game with friends, or racing games with friends and things like that. Like that's fun, but I generally like a solo experience, a single player campaign or whatever it is. So what was it about MMOs that really...
Well, there is a teamwork aspect that I find satisfying. I like to feel useful in a group. I like to I like to tank, or if I'm playing a DPS class, I like to have some kind of a utility, something that brings something to the party. So I like to feel useful, and I like that feeling of you're all working towards a goal together, and then you've achieved something. So I am still in a FC, they call them in Final Fantasy. It's like a guild. But I am still in one, but I just don't participate as much as I used to. But if I do have the opportunity, then sometimes I do still participate in their like events and things, but not as much as I used to. But that's mainly the difference, is just that my time now is not so, I don't have like as long of blocks of time, and it's not so, I guess I can't commit to something like a static, they call them a static in the raid group. But I do, I usually get like an hour or two, not every night, but a lot of nights. Like my kid will go up to his room and read his books or something. And
So it's fairly regular. You're still regularly.
it is pretty regular. And also, yeah, and my husband also plays games. He doesn't always play the same game I'm playing, but it's something that we both enjoy. So we do. And I think that both of us are kind of introverts. So we both do like having that kind of decompression time.
Sure. And it's also a shared experience for the both of you as well. Whether or not you're playing the same game, you understand the same language, right? Like if you have that shared love of something or hobby, like I think that makes it a much easier sell to yourself as well, that you don't feel like maybe you're casting away the time that you would spend with your family versus this other thing that you selfishly want to do, right?
Right. And it is nice that my son, he has his own Switch now, and he's liked some of the same games I like. So now he was playing Mario Odyssey for a long time. He got really into that. And I love that game as well, Mario Odyssey. But he got so into it that I think he finished it a lot. I mean, he played it a lot longer than I played it, and I think he got better than I did. And so sometimes if he's doing a really hard part, he'll hand it to me or my husband to help. And I'm like, I can't help that. I'm not as good at this as you are. So
you're better than me. You do it.
I know. So that's nice that he's gotten into it as well.
Do you feel like, and this is a personal question you don't have to answer, but with his autism, do you feel like video games have helped with that, I guess, situation at all? Is it any different? My younger brother's autistic as well, and he is very attracted to video games. He plays video games, and I think it allows him to be social in a way that he's not able to do typically. And I think it allows him to be in a world and kind of escape to a place where he feels safe and comforted and can talk to people and feel more acceptance than he generally otherwise does. So that's kind of where that question comes from.
Well, he's not very social. Like he doesn't have that social aspect yet, but I anticipate that as he gets older, it will give him something to talk to his peers about.
Sure.
And maybe there will be some kind of multiplayer game that he would get into. He has played Mario Kart, but not like with other people. I think, it may just be kind of like a sense of achievement. Like, oh, I can get good at this. Or he doesn't mind doing things over and over and over, like repeatedly. And so that way he will get very good at certain parts of the game.
Yeah.
and I'm kind of like, I wonder if someday he could be like a game tester or something, because he doesn't mind doing things over and over. And he oftentimes will find bugs, like really weird bugs. But then the bugs will make him really annoyed too. So I don't know.
I mean, he may be coming across things that not normally, you wouldn't normally see, but also there's a level of patience there too, where like, I think we've chatted in the past, and I think we talked a little bit about that for a second. It was like a person with particular needs could see a game or an experience very differently than somebody who doesn't. They could, if they encounter a bug, if I encounter a bug, I could look at that and be like, oh, that's annoying. Or I could poke fun at it and be like, interesting.
Or also the way that he plays games is different than how I might play them. Like, he might in Mario Odyssey just go around going into doors or jumping on things. Or in the first game that he really got into was that, can't remember the name of it now, but the Zelda game that was a remake that on Switch that
yes,
very cute.
The Game Boy remake, Link's Awakening, I believe.
Yeah. Yes. So he was watching me play it, and then he was like, I want to do that, and so he wanted to play, but he wasn't progressing the story. He was just going around, hitting chopping
cutting grass and
cutting.
The grass that was so beautifully animated by somebody.
Yes.
Just to bring it back.
Right. So it is interesting how, yes, somebody who is neurodivergent may play games in a different way, and so maybe that makes them a valuable resource for testing, or
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm sort of looking at this like you all have this. When I ask about the relationship of games, you have this. It's embedded now within your family. You have there's a commonality between everybody and being able to play, and I think that's awesome. And also the games that you're playing are very different from what your son is playing and you're observing. And I think some people might look at that and say, well, that's obvious. One's you're an adult and he's a child, but I think we can all with video games. What makes them unique is almost all age groups can engage in the same games. There are some games that are very narrative forward. You can read something different out of it, but the gameplay wise, the mechanics of it, what you're trying to do or accomplish is the same, I think, generally for everybody in a lot of games. And I'm wondering, with your family, do you have those shared experiences? Do you ever huddle around something together and work through something together, or do you find, I guess, excitement in certain games together? What are those games maybe that have done that for you?
Well, I mean, sometimes my husband and I will play Final Fantasy 14 together, so that's always fun. I always like playing with him, but I'm trying to think. Like, I don't think I've played. Actually, I did play with my son co-op on, what's that game? Oh, Piku Niku. Have you heard of this game, Piku Niku?
I'm not familiar with it. No.
Okay, you have to look up videos because it's hilarious. And that was a lot of fun because the characters, their animation, they just look like a little bean with legs, and the animation, I don't know if the legs are done like procedurally or something, but they kind of, anyway, they have very funny movement. And yeah, my son just thought it was hilarious. And I would say more often I might be watching him play, or he might be watching me play, rather than us playing together. And we both like Mario games. I'm actually going to probably buy the new Paper Mario for him.
Of course, for him. Indeed.
And also for me.
Kind of like looking out over everything we've talked about with your love of games, and also your career just at large. Like, when you play games, do you look at games differently now than you had then? I think the obvious answer is yes, because you just grow and you understand things differently. But do you have a more critical eye towards games? Are you critiquing it from a creative director? Are you looking at the animations because you know how that's done, and because you've worked on a game? Like, are you envisioning that, and does that impair
yes,
what you get out of
sometimes
playing?
sometimes it is sort of annoying. Well, I think it's annoying, like, when I point things out to my husband, because he's just like, I don't care, I just want to play it. I don't care like what the animation looks like. But yeah, I can't help it. I look at the animation, like I look at the animation. But also, in some ways, it makes me more forgiving, more understanding why things are the way they are. Like, why do the character's feet slide when it's turning? Or why doesn't the character have anticipation and proper jumping animation? That's because when you're playing, you want your input to be immediate. You want the feedback, because it's an interactive thing. So, like, I do still, in my job now, I do still work with our interactive team sometimes on reviewing games. So Kingdom Hearts 3 is an example. So
Did you get to work on Kingdom Hearts 3?
Yeah. So I would meet weekly with their lead animator, and then somebody from Disney Interactive who manages the project. So I would meet weekly with them and review animation, gameplay animation, cutscenes, also the character models, making sure they all look correct to the film. And so on that game, it was that we had a Toy Story level and we had a Monsters world. And so, being a huge fan of RPGs and a huge fan of Square Enix, that was like a dream project. It was so fun to work on. And so, having worked on games, that really helps now when they bring animation to me, then I can understand why it needs to be a certain way, or what their limitations are and how to work within them, and also how they're creating their cutscenes, and just, I guess, how to speak the language.
Game dev language, yeah.
Yeah, so I think it has helped. The other thing that's really interesting in how it has affected my career is now in theme parks, there are a lot of attractions that are like a game, like, say, Toy Story Mania, or
Buzz Lightyear.
I worked on, Buzz Lightyear, or I worked on Turtle Talk. And Turtle Talk is a live experience. However, the way that the animation is done is like a game, because the animation needs to react to the audience in real time. So the audience is like your players. They're asking Crush a question, and then the person who's puppeting Crush is using a PlayStation controller backstage and a touchscreen, and they're loading up in real time. They can see the audience member on a camera, and then they can, activate the animation and puppet Crush around with their controller. It is really amazing to watch them work, because then they're also doing the voice at the same time, and I'm like, how do you do all this? Amazing.
Wow.
And so. And yeah, a lot of the animation we call it canned animation, which is like pre-rendered animation that is done in loops like you would in a game. And so yeah, so when we did Turtle Talk, we did playtest just like you would in a game. So to see, okay, is the timing of this working? Is the joke landing? or how do we need to adjust it? Because always the audience will do things that you don't expect. Always. And so so you might need to adjust things, but that was very similar to working on a game. And so any kind of interactive projects, my boss will always like funnel those to me, because they're like, this world. So but yeah, it is really interesting, because then you're kind of, some projects are working with a combination of physical objects plus interactivity plus screens plus so it's a lot of fun in that way. But there is some I would say crossover, more theme parks attractions bringing in interactivity, like a game.
Yeah. Do you find that working in this space, interactivity, or just digital entertainment in general, does that take away from when you were, say, working on games at Double Fine, were you just like so sick of working on games, or is it so different? Is the process of making a game so different than playing that you're still able to enjoy and engage in the medium that you're working on?
I still enjoy playing. Like I said, I never was that into watching movies anyway. So like, working on movies, it didn't affect
right.
whether I watch movies or not. I always loved to get video games. So I would say, I might, when I was working on games, I might not have as much time to play games because it was a lot of work.
Sure. So not necessarily it's not because you were working on the games that you just didn't want to play. It's just, it is such an intense, at least though that phase was so intense and ate up so much time.
Yeah. In fact, around that time, I think I was playing Mass Effect. Like, I associate certain times in my life with certain video games.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
It's funny that you say you associate certain times with certain games. I think a lot of people do that with, could be movies, could be music. Can you do like chronologically, like what were those games like up until today? Like what were the games that really stood out to you at each point in your life?
Yes. I can
go.
Well, I know when I said like, in college, it was Super Nintendo. So Chrono Trigger.
Okay.
I mean, that's the game that I think of when I think of that time.
What about before that?
Oh, before that?
Yeah.
Super Mario Brothers, like I think it's just like the ones that I probably spent the most time on. I remember a lot of. And then let's say after that would probably be PlayStation 1. And I remember playing a lot of Ogre Battle and Final Fantasy Tactics. Was that on PlayStation 1 or 2?
Tactics was 1, I believe. Mm-hmm. And then they had the Tactics Advance on the Game Boy Advance. So that's around the same time there.
And Nintendo 64, obviously Mario 64. I remember playing that at a friend's house.
Talk about animation. That was like my... I don't think I understood or appreciated animation at all until I saw that for the first time. And it was striking, I think, for a lot of people seeing that.
Nintendo really doesn't get enough credit for their animation. I feel like, there's something called the Annie Awards that is like an animation awards. And I don't think Nintendo games like ever get, because the studios have to actually submit them to get an award. But for me, they have like the best. I mean, it's so smooth. Like the way that their characters, the way the animation like flows into each other, and the way it feels when you play it, it's so seamless.
Yes, I agree.
It feels, yes, there's a smoothness to it that is just so well polished that not a lot of companies, I don't know if they just don't have enough time. Most companies don't.
What are you going to shave off something? Let's shave off some frames here. We're not going to worry about that. So Nintendo 64, Mario, where are you now? We're moving into what realm? PlayStation 2?
Oh yeah. Well, I guess I skipped that PlayStation 1 and then 2. Gosh, what was on PlayStation 2? I think I played a lot of Frequency.
There you go.
It was like the first harmonics rhythm game that was like, it was all like electronica, and it was before. I played a lot of Rock Band, played a lot of the whole Mass Effect series. I loved all those BioWare games. I loved Dragon Age. I loved KOTOR, Jade Empire, even. um,
Is it just your love of games that makes it that's how you think about the time periods? Like you flash on the game first,
I
or
mean, I think you're right that it's because it is such a combination of different art forms. They're very immersive. So, and you're interacting with them. So it feels like it's something that you're doing. You're not just passively watching it. So it's like you feel like it's almost like you're participating in this activity. You went on this adventure, not just watched it. And also the amount of time that they take. I usually play these long RPGs, so it's like 100 hours. I get a very attached to the characters. If it's a game I like that I'm going to put 100 hours in, to me that's memorable and hopefully a memorable story. So yeah, and I think around the time when before I started at Double Fine, I was playing a lot. I played a lot of Final Fantasy 11 and World of Warcraft. I got really into those early Pixar area.
yeah, that change into that MMO space that we talked about earlier of like, yeah, the teamwork, the
Yes,
cultural.
and I was like, oh man, I'm so glad I didn't know about these in college because like I didn't get into EverQuest. I didn't really like get into like PC games until later.
Yeah.
But I was really glad I didn't because it would have been kind of disruptive, I think, to my studies.
Considering what you're playing now, and I guess you again mentioning all the RPGs that you've played and all of that, and then also looking at, again, I can't help but look at or think about your son playing games and kids playing games, and again my daughter and her own needs with hearing loss and whatnot, and how that might affect her playing games. It may or may not, because you can play with or without sound, but I feel like it's going to impact her in some way, shape, or form. Do you ever think forward into or ahead into what may be coming and what excites you about games? Maybe it's what excites you about them today and how that's just continues to excite you, but is there something about it that you see looking forward, like what is exciting you about where things are going with games?
I think, like I said, I'm not really into VR, but I do think AR has some cool stuff. And as AR becomes more, I'd say if there's some more comfortable way of wearing it, or if it's just like these glasses with AR overlay, that could be there's so many cool possibilities. And it is kind of like a theme park's attraction where I'm combining physical with digital with media with it's almost like magic tricks.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where I see stuff that I'm like, whoa, that's really cool. And like somebody posted on LinkedIn just a golf, like a little putting green, and they had projected images on the putting green to show like that kind of like move these laser looking things that move when your ball moves. And I'm like, okay, this is really cool. So I think that is such a cool area for games to go in, is this physical combination of physical and media area. The other thing that I saw recently on LinkedIn was like a little book, like a storybook, a white storybook. It's almost like a little theater. It makes a little theater screen for you with a little pop-up thing, and little like characters can move around on it. Just so cool. I don't know. I find that combination of physical and media like very, very fun and cool. Lots of possibilities there.
Yeah, I think I've started to think about this in the sense of like when we change, our generation moved from, you sort of, we touched on it with Mario 64 there. And my last guest, Simon, talked about this too, that transition from 2D to 3D. And that was a big shift for us. And I'm looking at my daughter now, who's 2, and the only thing she knows of video games is she wants to come up to my office and see Mario. She just says Mario. And we go and we turn on Mario 64. And I've now taught her, so she likes it when he comes up and says hello, right when you start the game, and she'll pair it back to him, hello. It's the cutest thing in the world, and I love it every single time. But now I've taught her that the buttons do things. So we'll start up the game, and just in that little grassy field, the play area, she'll press the button to make him jump. And then now she started saying hop, hop. And then she'll get up and she'll start hopping. And like, so she's seeing some kind of interactivity. But now I'm looking at this like, what is her world going to look like even today with these experiences you're talking about, by grabbing this blank book off a shelf, of being able to project something on it, or if you were wearing some type of glasses or goggles, what could it do with that physical object you have in your hands, or a table or a surface or anything like that? All the pros and cons, or whatever you want to call it, about AI, I think there's a lot of potential there that could create really unique and interesting experiences for anybody playing games, but especially for kids that are growing up. Like, that's the world they're entering right now, is these experiences exist. It's not going to be novel. It's just this is just how it works for them. And it's hard to think about like, what are all these things going to be? But you're touching on things right now that are already exciting and seem like magic. And that's what video games I think have always been for me is like a magic trick. It's every time I turn it on, it's magic. Something, like you said, I'm interacting, I'm participating with this thing. Like, what allows me to do that in a digital world, like, or a world that's not really my own or physical? It's just a strange sort of like connection that we have to these things, I think.
And I think just that taking down that barrier to entry of like something that's very natural, like kids naturally will use a touch screen more easily than like a controller. And so I think figuring out more ways to have the controls be more intuitive, or even like theme park attractions where you're actually like doing the thing, like doing the Spider-Man gesture to shoot webs and things like that. I think getting the technology to work those better is going to just be more fun. For me, it's like I want something that's like also some things, some experiences are fun if they're like really short, but other experiences, like you still want that kind of long adventure. So yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I'm glad that there's just such a variety now of games. It's like way, way more than when we were young. So there's just so many different types. Like if you want a short puzzle game, there's stuff like that, or even just like the whole like what's it called, Puzzmo?
Is that the online service where it has a bunch of like all kinds of puzzles? Yeah.
There's just such a variety now. So I like that. Yeah, it is interesting to think about like AI, because in the theme parks world, they're always trying to come up with like AI characters, or the little the robots that are in Star Wars Land, and I'm kind of like, well, we're not quite there yet. Like, but when you say that your daughter says hello to Mario, like, will there be a time when he says hello back and then they can have a conversation? It's kind of like weird to think about, but probably, like, they probably will.
Yeah. Exactly. Like, it's just, I don't know, the possibilities I feel like are endless, and that magic is going to continue. And I think, again, AI can be controversial in some spaces, but in some spaces, I think it can be very creative and unique and create scale is a word, but to scale a unique experience for people. To me, that magic that I get out of games, sometimes I get out of when I'm interacting with AI stuff. I'm like, how is this even like happening? Like, how is it doing this? It's just fascinating. I know it's all ones and zeros at the end of the day, but like there is something there that's triggering that same like magic, and I don't necessarily know that if I want to know how it's working, but I want it to be able to create these unique experiences that I think only I am going to have. And I think that's the special part of it, right? It's only I'm having this. If you want it to be,
right, yes.
There are some things you want to be a shared experience, but personal, yeah, very personalized. Could be dangerous in some regards. I don't want to go down that route, but I think it could also be very, very, very cool. Yeah, again, but I know it's all controversial. There's a lot of controversy around the use of it and in the right context, but I do see it, if it's done well and done right, it could be really, really cool for.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm necessarily on one side or the other. It just needs to be, like you said, it needs to be done right. It needs to be done in the right context. Like, there's just way too much of it right now. Like, it's just like the new buzzword where it's like, let's just put AI, slap it onto every application, whether it needs it or not, just because the shareholders or whoever is like gonna get excited about it. But I think it can have some like interesting applications, and at least right now it's at the point where it still needs a lot of human handholding, I think.
Of course. Human hand holding. And I don't think, going back to listening to you talk about the puppeteering of Crush, like that's always going to feel like magic too, right? There's room for both of these things, I think, to exist. And anyway, we'll see what happens, but it's all fascinating. And I think that, again, what you mentioned with participatory, that the participatory nature of games and allowing yourself to be part of this longer world or bigger world, or even a small, a very small experience is, I think, can be powerful for people, including myself and yourself. So yeah, anyway, that's a very good place to maybe wrap things up, I guess. Unless there's anything else you wanted to mention about games. What are you playing right now? What are you if you could sign off and go play a game right now, what are you playing?
Oh, probably Final Fantasy 14.
All right.
Although I just downloaded Lorelei and the Laser Eyes.
Yeah, yes. A lot of people talking about that.
I'm excited to play that. Well, I mean, I love Simogo's other puzzle games. I don't know if you ever played Device 6.
Played Device 6, played, was it Earwalk? Earwalk was,
Yes,
I liked Earwalk
Earwalk.
because it was just eerie. It was so cool and like,
I know. I love the atmosphere that they create. Very good at that. Their art styles are always like really cool to me, stylish and puzzle solving. And so I also love reading mysteries. That's I think it kind of goes along with the puzzle aspect, things I like. I love mystery books, so this seems like a mystery in a game form. So I am excited to play
yeah.
that.
I agree. I do want to check that out as well. Actually, before you go, real random question, and I think you may have answered this at some point, but is there in your day to day right now, like in your work, maybe in the past 3 or 4 months, whatever, have you brought video games into the work that you're doing? I think I saw something, a post of that you put maybe on LinkedIn or something of
Yes.
there's a mural. Correct me if I'm wrong here. There's a mural inside the new Pixar hotel. What's it called? The
Pixar Place Hotel.
Pixar Place Hotel. And
Mhm.
one of the images you've shown looked a lot like a video game or less inspired from a game. So I was just curious: are there times that you bring video games into your work today, or think
Yes.
about video?
So, yeah, I mean, so for the pool deck, we wanted to do characters that were made of pool tiles. And so the pool tiles, they look like little pixels. So they look like pixel art
Yep.
when you put them together. So at first, we were maybe going to hire a pixel artist, professional, someone who's done this before.
Right.
At first, we were going to hire somebody. And then I was like, well, I have this very specific idea in mind of what I want them to look like. So I'm just going to do them. So I've never done pixel art before. I mean, except when I was a little kid, that doesn't
Right.
count.
Way back in the day. Yeah.
Like official pixel art, I've never done. So it was actually really challenging. So we had like a grid template for each character, and I tried to make them very symmetrical because that's how pixel art
Mm-hmm.
tends to be, and then also with the same kind of eyes. But a lot of Pixar characters are different body shapes. You've got a fish, you've got a car, you've got like an alien, you've got elves, humans, you've got monsters. You've got a monster whose round head with one eye. It's hard to fit all of these characters with different body shapes and sizes and things into this one template. So it was very challenging because one character I would like the look of, and then I'm like, oh, I like that. I'm going to go back and change this other character. So there's a lot of going back and forth of trying to get everything looking like it's all from the same, art style or same, let's say, video game. So it ended up that they were supposed to go on the pool deck, but they didn't pass the slip test. Disney's safety standards are extremely, extremely stringent.
Sure.
And so that's something in theme parks that we do have to go through safety checks with everything. And sometimes we have to change our designs because of it. So some of the colors of the tiles didn't pass the slip test. And so we ended up putting them vertically on the snack bar. So they still get to be seen, not exactly how we originally planned, but the style of them is still, they're made out of tiles, it's really cool. So yeah, that was definitely something where I brought my love of video games into my theme parks work now. So that was really fun.
That's
And
awesome.
I hope that they make merchandise out of it.
That would be so cool. But that's so
It would
great to
be.
just again have this passion to, be excited about video games and love video games from a young age, to be able to sort of accidentally in a weird way when you're looking backwards, bring that into your work, coming into Pixar, but then meeting Tim and then going to Double Fine and maybe working on what could be considered a dream, bringing a project that you had as a kid into reality with Costume Quest, even though it was probably a killer, just like, exhausting and, a great experience, but definitely something that exhausted you, I think is very, very cool to now where you are with Pixar and being able to just do things like what you just described with the mural. Like, again, this through line that has kind of brought you to where you are and you're able to bring it with you along is very, very cool. So awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I still love games and I do love working on games still, like working on any of the interactive projects at Pixar. I think the same thing I like about games is what I like about theme park stuff, which is like it's interactive art, and you get to make these immersive worlds for people to interact with. So I think there's something that's really fascinating for me about that.
Yeah, again, you're living the dream. Interactive art, and that's what you do day to day, interacting in a physical space, and you get to bring your experience from the digital space into it. It's so cool. I'm endlessly fascinated about what you do and your story. And yeah, if none of this was eloquent at all, I apologize, but I don't know. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you and having you on the show. And I just appreciate your time.
Oh, thanks for having me. I love talking about this stuff.
Well, we can maybe do it again sometime and keep going, because I could too. So, all right, I'll let you go. Thank you so much. And have a blast playing Final Fantasy XIV tonight. I'm sure that's what
Okay.
Yeah, I'm still pinching myself after that episode. So there's a big part of me that like is obsessed with Disney parks. I grew up going to Disneyland a ton, and I always wanted to be an Imagineer. And so the fact that I get to like talk with somebody who's working with them directly and who has worked at Pixar of all places, it just kind of blew my mind. And you can tell I had a really kind of challenging time pulling myself away from the career part of the conversation and trying to get into the games bit of it, because I'm so fascinated by what Tasha does. It's just so cool. But all the while, like, very cool to hear about how Tasha thinks about games, how they kind of interplay in her work and life, and they are a big part of her life. You know, it's a big social element for her as well as within her family. Like it's pervasive. And I think that's really cool for people who are inspired by this medium and all the different facets that it has to offer and are able to bring those into a career or inspire a career. If you enjoyed this episode of the show, please share it with a friend. The easiest thing to do is probably to share the website, ybutton.online. It includes links to most podcast platforms. I'd also appreciate a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever supports that kind of thing. It would go a long way. And I'd love to see your comments about the show too. So again, if you can leave a review or a comment, that'd be awesome. If you want to get in touch, ask questions, or recommend guests, feel free to reach out to ybuttonpodcast@gmail.com or on Threads or Instagram at ybuttonpodcast or Mastodon at ybutton@mastodon.social. You can also find me on Threads and Instagram at _Kyle Starr or Mastodon at kylestar@mastodon.social. This episode was produced by AJ Filari. The theme song was written by Childstar, which is me, featuring my friend Scott Wilkie on keys. It's called On the Same Page. You can find it on all streaming platforms. Thanks again for listening to Y Button, and remember, when you press Y, ask why.